Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site. And with me recording on Tuesday night at the start of free agency is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, Arizona Cardinals site from SB Nation, and also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. If you recall, last week we had 2 episodes with Seth and his co-host from his podcast, Justin Higdon, as we broke down the prospects and the performances at the NFL Combine. Last week as well, we had an interview with Calvin Beachum. Though, spoiler alert, as you guys already know, is coming back to the Cardinals. And this is our first free agency. Our first free agency show, episode 408, Seth. We didn't get to do a free agency preview this year, just how the show schedules worked out because of the Combine and everything. And so we didn't really do a free agency preview. Normally we talk about which of the players they should re-sign. We kind of target players, and so we'll only kind of do that a little bit. But doesn't it feel like we're a little bit less prepared for free agency this year? And maybe it's just because we don't know what the plan is exactly.
Yeah, I think it's more that, like, it's not as easy when you, I think, we'll talk about one of the signings. We got word that they had their eyes on 2 Eagles defensive players, and then they were going to kind of budget their way through the rest of this, right? And we assumed that the reports of a rebuild in year 1 were true, but you only believe things as they come out. And they created cap space with some moves, with restructuring moving some of DJ Humphrey's bonus money and doing releasing Marcus Golden, just some small moves. But I think they had the smallest roster in the NFL, right? They needed 32 players to fill out their roster, which is really unheard of. I mean, you don't usually go into free agency needing to sign 32 players.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they end up with and how many undrafted guys they end up bringing in ultimately. If I recall, back in 2018, they brought in a massive load of undrafted rookies. And then in the last couple of years, since the COVID year, they relied on their previous year's scouting and brought in, not true. They were non-rookie guys that hadn't really gotten a chance anywhere. They were undrafted players from 2019, 2018. And that's kind of been the strategy of the past couple of years. But it'll be interesting. The roster is, far, far from done. And free agency hasn't done much. Marcus Golden's release makes sense in a lot of ways because he was not productive last year. It saves them money. And honestly, he probably doesn't fit this defense.
Right. And you're talking about a new, a brand new organization, new coaching staff. So those cuts are going to come. Those cuts are going to happen. You're just going to have to, it's one of those situations where you can't get too or fall too in love with anyone on the roster at this point, because we just truly don't know what this staff and organization thinks of anything, right?
Absolutely. In this edition of the show, episode 408, what we're going to talk about is the one external signing that we know of, and that's linebacker Kaiser White. Talk about him. We're going to talk about the re-signings the Cardinals have done, or the guys that are re-signing. We're going to look at the loss of the Cardinals' 2 most notable free agents, and then discuss what they still need to do, which seems to feel like anything. all of Monday after the beginning of the legal tampering period, it felt like collectively on social media we were all waiting on that meme about the Cardinals and the stick figure poking a stick on a dead guy's like, do something. Do something. That's kind of what it's been so far, and we've gotten little to no action. But let's start things off. There has been one signing from outside the organization. The Cardinals bring in Kaiser White, linebacker, former Los Angeles Charger for 4 seasons, played for the Eagles last season and was productive, 110 tackles, a sack and a half, 7 pass breakups. He joins the Cardinals on a 2-year deal with a max of $11 million. We'll actually see what the actual numbers come out to be. It seems like that's a pretty modest deal.
When you talk about max of $11 million, that includes like incentives and stuff for those that don't get what that verbiage means. And like Jess said, that's cheap. And not in a negative way.
And that's probably is more like a 2-year, $8 million kind of deal, I'm guessing.
Right. Like, yeah. Like he can earn an extra $1.5 million a year based on X, Y, and Z stuff. And so, that's we got word Monday. I guess it was, Monday. So Sunday or Monday. I don't remember. It all blends together at this point. But that the 2 guys that they were looking at were not TJ Edwards, which you and I had, speculated way back in February after they signed Jonathan Gannon, but instead Kaiser White and safety Marcus Epps. I think the Marcus Epps one surprised me more than Kaiser White.
Right.
Even though he obviously did not sign with Cardinals, ended up going for I think 2 years and $12 million or 3 years and $18 million to the Raiders.
The Cardinals did not need to spend that much money on a safety when they've got Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson. The interesting thing about like with TJ Edwards, and then he was one of the first free agents to get off the board going into the Bears.
And you and I, let's be honest, we saw those numbers and we were like, that's it. Like
right. They spent more money on Tremaine Edmonds, and Edwards apparently was content with a little bit less.
By the way, can we just agree that it's insane that they traded Roquan Smith and then paid 2 people way more money to replace him?
That
like
Bears are gonna Bears, right?
But yeah, so I mean, you look at it, they came back with Kaiser White, and it makes sense. I mean, they needed people that were comfortable in this defense, right?
Right, and that's one of the most important things is that I'm certain we're going to see as there are large and small free agent additions is that we will see offensive players that have some sort of connection to the offense that Drew Petzing's going to lead, and then connections to Jonathan Gannon and the defensive system. And Kaiser White made a ton of sense. I will say this, the fact that they didn't go out and get TJ Edwards tells me one thing very interesting, and it is whether it was coming from the top or the belief in this coaching staff and Zaven Collins. Because TJ Edwards, who was the quarterback of that Eagles defense, they let him. They don't pursue him, or maybe they pursued him, and but it seemed like it couldn't have been much pursuit because it was almost immediately after 9 a.m. on Monday when TJ Edwards' deal came across across social media.
Right, and it also wasn't an absurd number like Javon Hargrave, right? Like, it wasn't like, holy cow, you gave a 31-year-old a 4-year, $80 million contract? I mean, let's be honest, a name we'll talk about later got a bigger deal, and you and I were kind of like, wow. I'm really surprised that he got that much guaranteed. And so when it came up, it was interesting to see how it all kind of played out, because I did not expect them to go after Edwards. I was a little surprised that they were able to get Kaiser White for. I feel like it's a really. I mean, I don't want it to come across as like saying cheap, but I mean like that's a very team friendly deal on a guy that's.
He's been super productive the last 2 years statistically. He had
Right,
110
and
tackles last year for the Eagles, had 130-something tackles for the Chargers the year before.
And something I don't know if you caught, but he's like been the best cover guy in the league the last couple of years. And so we know how much that's killed the Cardinals, right? Like, especially tight ends. And you look at the tight ends that this Cardinals play. Here's what I was looking for. Next gen stats. White is the only player to be targeted at least 100 times over the last 2 seasons and allow fewer than 5 yards per target.
That's
linebackers.
Impressive.
Yeah, defensive backs. Like, so this is a dude that ends up, really just doing a nice job on defense. And that's a big deal because now all of a sudden you have some options with the 2 young guys that are there right now.
That's the question now that we need to ask is, what do they do now? Like, what is the role White will have? Like what makes the most sense is for White to play exactly the same role he did for the Eagles last year. That said, it felt like Isaiah, and we talked about this on an earlier show, it felt like in that defense that Isaiah Simmons was perfectly matched for that Kaiser White role and perhaps a more talented version of Kaiser White. But with Kaiser White in, he's going to start, and because they've got 3 linebacker positions that they need, they've got some options. So we can assume perhaps, just on paper, Zaven Collins will play middle. The quarterback of the defense, Kaiser White, would play the role that he had in Philly. And then Simmons would be in the Reddick role. Maybe the Reddick role looks different this year, but it seems like it would be that. I mean, maybe.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's just tough right now because I guess you can ask the question, like, are they going to play the defense the same, or are they going to deploy a true, like, 4-3? And because of the athletic ability of both Kaiser White and Isaiah, and coverage ability of Kaiser White and Isaiah Simmons, you don't need those extra corners on the field, right? Like, you don't need to bring in, or like safeties, so all of a sudden now you've got matchup guys in Simmons, White,
you can almost
Baker
stay
and Thompson
in base. Like,
yeah.
You never have to sub almost at
Right.
all.
And with the teams they play that run the ball, that might be a huge benefit to them.
Yeah, and if the guy, that might be the case. Especially, the downside is that. But I figure, like, if they're going to, so there is that possibility where you have Collins in the middle, and then White and Simmons both as your 4-3 outside backers, who are flexible, play in space, drop in coverage, sometimes blitz, basically making it, since we know Simmons can play in the slot, and perhaps that is the role that they project for him as well, you never have to change. And for an offense, you look at the defense and you don't know, it disguises a lot of things of what they want to do. If we want to kind of change it up, well, perhaps they'll put White in the quarterback role at middle, have Simmons in the White role, which is the more coverage, and maybe Zaven Collins gets, or maybe even Zaven Collins as they project a position change where he rushes at the end, because he's built like Philly. He's built like the 4-3 edge rushers that the Eagles employed in Philly. Or he could play the rush linebacker role and be a bigger, longer version of Reddick. Say they draft Will Anderson, they plug him in at the rush linebacker, and Zaven plays D end. That seems like a lot of work, but it seems like there are a lot of possibilities of what they could do.
Yeah, and that's what makes it fun, right?
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk a little bit more about free agency, only this time we've got guys coming back. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise of See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. 2-year deals appear to be the trend. Thus far, at the time of recording on Tuesday night, the Cardinals have announced. There are 3 announced and 1 other reported, but 4 of their own free agents return. The first that broke was Kelvin Beachum, who returns on a 2-year. Just more than $5 million salary. Kicker Matthew Prater is back on a 2-year deal. We don't know the numbers on that contract yet. Running back Corey Clement gets a 1-year deal. A guy that you might, most Cardinals fans probably won't recognize that name at all because he spent only half a year with the Cardinals. And then lastly, reported on Tuesday night, not reported yet by the team, but right guard Will Hernandez is brought back on a 2-year, $9 million deal, and his prove-it deal pays off with a little bit of security. What are your thoughts on Beachum's return?
It's surprising in the sense that, we were curious what they were going to do with Josh Jones, especially after he played so well in his opportunity to finally be the guy. But people always say it's really hard to move a guy from the right or the left side to the right side. He looked obviously much more comfortable on the left side. So I guess it makes sense because you don't have anybody in-house that you're comfortable with now on the right side. So we'll see how that works out and everything. But it'll be interesting to kind of see how this is deployed now. Do they have 4 positions along the offensive line secured? Do they only have 3? Is DJ Humphries on the market? Is Josh Jones on the market? If they do have 4, are they really going to be are they really going to be interested in putting a rookie pivot in the middle of a line hypothetically of DJ Humphries, Josh Jones, rookie Will Hernandez, and Kelvin Beachum? Because at one point you look at it and you say, okay, a rookie can make sense because they're fairly veteran laden. I mean, Jones is going into his 4th season and doesn't have a ton of starts under his belt, but he's been around the NFL a lot. But on the flip side, it's wouldn't you want somebody?
Right. We saw a rookie center on the offensive line in 2018 with Mason Cole. That was rough, to say the least. Granted, it was with rookie quarterback and Josh Rosen, so it was the combination of that. But it's interesting to me, and that, obviously the center position is what we're going to be addressing a little bit later in the show. The Beachum contract was surprisingly low. He's played.
Yeah, it's almost like a security blanket.
Right.
Doesn't it feel like?
It does, because he's making just the league minimum the next 2 seasons. And when I talked to Beachum, he was looking for some security. He was also looking to compete. So on the surface, I think is that he's getting the league minimum this year. He's getting a little more than $2 million in a signing bonus. His contract makes it to where he could be a starter or he could be a reserve. We know one thing for sure: Beachum can play both left tackle and right tackle. He was a left tackle for his entire career until he came to Arizona when he switched to the right side. When I talked to him last week, he's learned to play the right side. when he had the opportunity to play left tackle last year, he said it felt good. Like he feels he can still play the position. So my guess is, unless they already have the plan to move Josh Jones to left guard, is something that Justin Pugh suggested on social media could work. Perhaps the goal is to have the two compete for the starting job, since neither one of them has any true connection to the coaching staff there now. Previously, they can go with a true competition and see how that goes. And if Jones beats him out, then Beacham's contract is not prohibitive. And the fact that they gave him, there are playing time incentives in 2024, means that at least if they move forward with him in 2024, that there's just they're not expecting him to start. There would be a bonus for him to do that.
Yeah, and I think that would be a great way to look at it, right? Like a guy that can come in and be the starter if need be, but if not, you have a veteran backup. Obviously, we don't know did we get the guaranteed money yet?
Yes, the guarantee is just the signing bonus and his salary this year, and so it's $3.25 million. It's a little more, $1.1 million in this year's salary. He's guaranteed his salary this year, and just the signing bonus, which is a shade over $2 million.
Okay, so I mean, I think it's also one of those things that you could probably, if he is your backup, like you said, it's a veteran minimum basically, and then you can move on kind of quickly if you need to.
Yeah.
But he's not a bad guy to have on the roster in the same sense.
And honestly, he's despite what he said about Kyler, people are taking that seriously. He said kind of the same thing last offseason. He's well respected in the locker room. He's a great in the community. He's a great guy to have on the football team. But Matthew Prater, how surprised are you that he has returned? Not only is back, but on a 2-year deal. He's going to be 39 this season. Missed 4 games with the hip injury. I'm not surprised, and the truth is, I guess for me, there aren't a ton of kickers that are going to be better for the money, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, people get so caught up in the financial aspect of things, but the reality just becomes this was the fit, and it made the most sense for them and the team, and that's what they ended up doing. And so it's one of those situations where I think it just makes sense, and from there you just kind of go.
Yeah. Well, and I think the fact that they brought back Jeff Rogers as a special teams coordinator, there was a comfort level. With that.
Yeah, and then it just makes it easier, right? Like there's just one less thing.
Which means we know you've got Aaron Brewer's got to be coming back, right?
You would expect. And does that mean Andy Lee's coming back?
I mean that. I think of the 3, I think the least likely or the most likely not to be back is Lee, because you've got a guy in Nolan Cooney on the roster who's done a little work and held for him, but they need to get someone in so they can have a full off season, because Andy Lee, Aaron Brewer, Matt Prater makes the kicking game automatic. Take one piece out of that, and it's very questionable.
Right.
But yeah, I'll be interested to see what the numbers come in at. He got basically, I think it was 2 years, $4.5 million when he signed 2 years ago. The Spot Track, his projected or calculated market value was at like 3.7. We'd been like getting a 2 year, $7.5 million a year. I wouldn't guess that the Cardinals would pay that much for a kicker, but maybe that's something that And let's think of it this way: did Monty Ossenfort comes from the Patriots, where they had incredible stability at kicker for a long time, and were paying top dollar for kickers for a while, going from Andy Vinatieri to Stephen Gostkowski. So maybe that is somewhere where they're willing to spend a little bit of money. Corey Clement, he was mainly special teams. He was signed after Jonathan Ward went down, but had played himself into a rotation by the end of the season. He is a former Eagle, but he has no ties to this coaching staff because he was on the Cowboys the year before, and so he left the Eagles after Doug Peterson left. So he would have had connections to Doug Peterson, but not to Nick Sirianni and company there. Are you surprised at that?
No. He, again, we're talking about 30, whatever it was, 32 coming in. So there's going to be a lot of fillers right now.
And minimum, he's, again, comfort level with Jeff Rogers on special teams.
Right. A veteran presence that has comfort with the special teams guy that let's be honest, and this is something that we haven't, had a huge discussion about, but, you mentioned Monty and his background, and then you look at Coach JG and his background, and we're probably looking at some potentially very conservative coming, football here. So what is one of the keys to having a conservative but good football team is solid special team? So, it doesn't guarantee him anything, right? But they are going to put an emphasis on the special teams and making sure that that's a lockdown thing, because that's, a big deal for guys like Gannon and Ossenfort.
And truthfully, he also kind of fits the offensive skill set. He doesn't have a relationship. He hasn't played for Drew Petzing before, but if you look at his coaching tree, he does come from that same offense. Doug Peterson, Andy Reid, and guess what? Clement played in that Doug Peterson offense. He's a kind of like the way he projects if he plays, he's a true third down back. He can get you a little bit of production in the running game. They liked the way he blocked in the passing game last year, which is why he earned some playing time. So he potentially could be a third down back type player, just coming in for sparingly, things like that. So you get a little bit of upside in that sense, plus special teams. I can't imagine he's going to get anything more than the league minimum or one of those contracts that gives cap relief because it's structured in a way where he gets a little bit of guaranteed money. It's the league minimum or a little more than the league minimum, and it counts less against the cap than other things. But it was interesting that he's one of the first signings. Right. That's kind of the interesting part.
Not just for signings, but he was part of the first group that was announced. I mean, Beecham and Prater, you kind of you're like, oh,
that makes sense. And you're like, Corey Clement. You're like,
and then they tacked Clement onto the end, and you're like,
and he actually signed because the other two were agreed to terms, and Clement was like, I'm in there, I'm putting ink to paper. I'm like, I'm not letting him just take that out.
Yeah.
The last one is Will Hernandez. That hasn't been announced, but it was reported Tuesday night. Based on the way he played last year, he makes a lot of sense. He was consistent last year. It gives them a little. His edge is sometimes over the edge, but he plays with the edge. He's a dog, and then in terms of, and he's big and he's athletic, and you kind of look at. You've talked about if there's a comp out there for some of the offensive linemen out there, a guy that's been connected to the Cardinals is TCU Steve Avila, who comps very closely with Hernandez as the type of player and physical build.
Yeah, and I think you just need some nasty on that line, something that, outside of what J.R. Sweezy was the last guy. We have a lot of nice players and nice guys, but you need a little bit of nasty on that, and that's not Hump, that's not Beecham. Jones hasn't really shown that, so you need a Hernandez out there, and a guy like you said, like Avila, or a guy like oh shoot, the guy's a Whippler from Ohio State, right? Like you need a guy like that if they're gonna go the rookie route. If not, then you got some more options. But that like you said, that gives you the little bit more of a badass, which is let's be honest, they were kind of missing.
And honestly, it's a good thing for them to do. It was Hernandez played well when he played. He had the pec injury.
It's crazy, and it's crazy that these guys come to Arizona and then all of a sudden they get hurt. And his was a fluke thing, so it's not like it wasn't like a soft tissue injury, like like a calf or a hamstring. But we've seen that with other guys. But like, it's crazy that this guy that's been this big physical guy that's still in his prime comes to Arizona, and then we heard it, like, torn pec, and so like he must have not obviously torn it off the bone.
No, on Hard Knocks it said it was a strain.
Yeah, and so or he really is just a badass, and like he was like, "No, I'm good. I'll just play."
Well, and I'm sure because he was on that 1-year deal, he probably knew that he needed to come back and play.
Yeah, and again, that will endear him to his teammates and fans and things like that. To be the enforcer and tough guy, and he was unfortunately thrown out of a game, which in hindsight was an absurd call by the official, because he wasn't trying to do anything to the official. He was trying to get to his guys to help. But like, that's the type of player and guy he is, and like you said, that's kind of one of the bigger things that the Cardinals have missed, in terms of just having somebody that owns that that, like you said, borderline dirty. The guy
plays with nasty. He plays with nasty.
The guy that all the other fan bases hate, from the Cardinals, and they just, I mean, quite frankly, they just haven't had that, and so that's what he brings, and that's what you like to see.
Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web, let's talk about the losses that they've had in free agency so far. Zach Allen and Byron Murphy. That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the Best Hour Cardinals Talk on the Web. The Cardinals' two most high-profile free agents, Zach Allen and Byron Murphy, both are gone, which sadly means the entire 2019 draft class minus Kyler Murray is no longer on the roster, with only Michael Dogbe with the potential to be back. And Michael Dogbe has not remained on the roster. He's been cut about 10 times and re-signed. So the 2019 draft class that we all felt pretty good about, adios. Andy Isabella, gone. Now Byron Murphy, gone. Zach Allen, gone. Hakeem Butler, gone. Lamont Gilliard, Josh Miles, Michael Dogbe, everyone gone. Caleb Wilson didn't even make any roster. But Zach Allen gets a 3-year, more than a $45 million deal to go to the Denver Broncos and follow Vance Joseph. And Tuesday night, before that, just a little bit before the show was recorded, Byron Murphy, 2-year deal, $22 million to go to the Minnesota Vikings, where he replaces Patrick Peterson, who after 2 years goes to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Thoughts on losing either? Because didn't it feel like I felt like it would have been good to bring back one of them, but then we kind of I almost got the vibe from Monty when he talked at the Combine that he was prepared to move on from both of them.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those situations where the team, it goes back to what we talked about with like Golden. Like, these guys, it's easier for them to move on, right? They have no rapport with them. But I will say this: you and I we had heard that Zach was going to ask that Zach wanted 460 or about 15 million a season, and I don't think you and I were overwhelmed by that. I think 448, 336 was probably closer to where we felt comfortable with that. But it was the guaranteed. He wanted half guaranteed, and it's like, geez, man, like
And he got it.
you've
He got it
you've
from Denver.
yeah, you've not been able to play a whole season your entire career. Somebody's going to guarantee you, and they guaranteed 2/3. Like they did basically, virtually 346 and guaranteed 32 and a half.
Yeah.
And you're just kind of like, I mean,
That said,
go get it, man.
That
Go
said,
get it.
he's. I mean, for him, it makes all the sense in the world because he's going to be playing in the same defense where he has statistically and in terms of impact has improved each year. He's a poor man's version of J.J. Watt. You can't put him on the same level as J.J. Watt, but he does a lot of the same things. And in terms of his impact, I think for sure, he's not Defensive Player of the Year material, but I think the next step for him, I think he's easily a 10 sack a year type guy.
Well, and I think he is. And that's where this gets tricky. And this is where I end up being okay with them moving on. And I think you tend to agree, and I don't want to speak for you, but you look at it, you've got a guy in Zach Allen who, had a career year, and we always laugh that it's convenient, right? That he had a career year in his final year of his contract, 5.5 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, 20 quarterback hits. He had a really solid season, and he still missed 4 games.
Yeah.
And so
he improved the thing for me that I have a hard time with is that you have a guy in the building. Now, granted, the original evaluators, the original coaches aren't there anymore, but he's improved every single year. You see the type of impact that he has. He has positional versatility because you could put him out on the edge, even at the 280 that he weighs, 280, 290. You can put him as a straight edge rusher off the edge. You can play him in the interior. He has that sort of positional versatility like J.J. Watt. He's improved every year. And what we're going to see is him break out with another team. A Cardinals draft pick that once again breaks out with some other team, which is extremely frustrating, especially for a guy who's at a position that the Cardinals badly need right now. Their defensive line right now, the guys that they have under contract are Lecky Fotu and Rashard Lawrence.
Right.
That's it.
The only thing I would say to that is, they gave him basically $1 million per game he's played. Like, not $1 million per sack or anything like that. Like he's played in 45 games in his 4 seasons. You look at Draymond Jones, who was, the bigger named or guy he's replacing in Denver. And Jones went to Seattle on a similar deal. He got 3 years, $51 million. And Jones in his career has played in 56 games, so 11 more games. He has 22 sacks compared to Allen's 11.5. And he has 28 tackles for loss compared to, Allen's 21. So you ask the question, you're paying in Allen, you're paying for what you're hoping.
Right.
He can stay healthy and do, because we have seen him produce healthy, but 5.5 is his cap so far, and that's in 13 games. So, if is he going to be able to get to 6.5 or 7.5 to replace Draymond Jones? And if he does, which will be good, don't get me wrong, but if he does that, is he going to be able to do it for 16, 17 games? Because he never has. This isn't, this isn't negativity. This is just reality. He's just never done it. And that's what the Cardinals were like, we can't pay you that right now based on the fact that you've just never been healthy.
But what about Byron Murphy? 2 years, $22 million. In terms,
I was a little surprised by this one.
And the only thing I have to say about this is that, and I heard that they lowballed him, and of course they did. The one thing, like $11 million a year for a cornerback that can play inside and out, and is honestly, in terms of skill set, is versatile in what he can do. He can play well in zone. He can play man to man. He's someone who's able to do that. He's got length. He's strong. He can make plays on the ball. That's hard to replace. Now, that said, and so that's the one that upsets me a little bit more, because also at cornerback, the Cardinals have nothing. They've got Marco Wilson and they've got Christian Matthew. Marco Wilson, that he's promising. Christian Matthew was a 6th-round rookie who's 25 years old entering the league. And they don't have anybody else.
Well, let me ask you this, and I don't disagree, right? I don't disagree, and we don't know obviously if they were in on James Bradbury or not, but an $11 million feels low, or we had heard it was going to be closer to 16, so obviously 11 is a lot better. But let me ask you, I mean, James Bradbury, who's head and shoulders above Byron Murphy as a player, got 338, a value that can hold up to 44 million, but 338 with 20 guaranteed, and Murph gets 222. So was it really a deal? Because I mean, you're talking 12.5-ish, 12.6-ish for Bradbury, and the only thing that Murphy has over him is age. He's going to be 30, and I think Murph's only going to be 25. But again, you're talking about a guy that has never or has played a full season once in his career. And with young guys, young athletes, you don't, that's the old joke, is you don't hear about a guy that used to have a bad back.
That's the one thing that I wonder about. I will say this. He ended up being like, last year before he got hurt, he was so good.
Yeah, he was playing great.
He was, and for the first time in his career, he's playing almost exclusively on the boundary. And we've been hearing forever just how much like they feel he's one of the best slot corners in the NFL, and we felt like he didn't play elite in the slot, but then he was playing there outside, lining up against the top corners. He's playing out of his mind good. That said, the one thing I can understand why the Cardinals wouldn't do it, because they are the team that knows exactly everything about his back. Their doctors treated him. They dealt with it. So I'm guessing is that there were long-term concerns, and that's probably why he only got a 2-year deal. But if I had to guess, the Cardinals probably came in at 1 year, $8 million, or something similar.
But is that? I mean, and that's the thing.
Fair,
right?
But
I mean, and that goes back to the Allen thing. Like, we love Zach Allen, but there was no way you could guarantee him $33 million. There's just no way. This dude has never played a full season. Murph, I know he played 16 last year, so I don't want to be pedantic, but like,
yeah, the only game he missed was COVID,
right?
2021.
But like, this dude has been nicked up his entire career, and that comes with, this is something that Justin and I have been talking about on the podcast. When you talk about guys like Byron Murphy, and then who was the kid last, Trent McDuffie, and then we've talked about it this year with Devin Witherspoon. There's a genuine concern with how they play the game, because they are so physical despite their size. They list him at 5'11", 190. He's probably closer to 180. but he doesn't play like it, right? He's a physical guy that likes to play aggressively. And I don't think people understand how small that is comparative to a guy like Patrick Peterson, who always gets a bad rap about not being, overly physical. Like Peterson plays in the like 210s.
And he started his career at about 220 and had to lean down throughout his career.
Right. And so like that's the, Murphy plays, and this is going to sound bad. It's not. It's a compliment. Murphy plays recklessly. Like he loves to be physical, mix it up, play with the run. And that's what people love about him. But then he's always nicked up. He's always missing time. He's missing snaps because he's dealing with the shock of that. And so to your point about the back, like if the staff says like, man, this is a guy that missed 8 games this year with a back issue, we don't see it just getting better like overnight. It's tough to be like, all right, we'll match this 11 million a year. And that's not saying he's not worth it, because obviously he is. Somebody paid it to him. But I just don't know if you can do that. Like, because here's the biggest thing. And let me get your opinion on this. If you sign Murphy, obviously you still have a need at cornerback, but it goes down, right? Like it's not the DEFCON, 1 that it is right now in Cardinals land, right? Of they got to find a corner. Like all of a sudden it's like, okay, it's, then you go back to the D line. You're like, oh man, they need an edge or something. So.
Yeah. When you bring in, if you re-sign Murphy, at least what you do is you might be set. You might be set, depending on what your plan is for like Isaiah Simmons. You might only need 2 starters and then guys to develop, like an Antonio Hamilton, whether it's that, but an Antonio Hamilton-like player where you're comfortable with him starting, but he can do other things as well. That's the thing. So, what is the plan at cornerback moving forward? Like that's the thing. Are they going to be able to sign someone who's even as good as Murphy? That is the question moving forward. And are they going to do it for more or less money? Is it going to be an older guy? The defensive line still needs work. But in fact, that's what we're talking about next. So coming next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's wrap things up talking about what the Cardinals badly need to do still. What do they need to do in free agency still? That's coming next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. We know what the Cardinals have done. What do they still need to do? And obviously, cornerback and the defensive line are critical things, because on the defensive line, they only have 2 guys under contract. One who is a starter quality in Rashard Lawrence, but also can't stay healthy. Hasn't stayed, like, since his last year of college, has missed time with injuries. Lecky Fotu, he hasn't quite taken the steps to be very good or even starter quality good. And then, like, Jonathan Ledbetter, you can re-sign, but they haven't announced that he's an exclusive rights guy. At cornerback, you've got Marco Wilson. He's going to be on the roster, presumably. And then you got Christian Matthew. You can't go into the season thinking about they need significant additions there. Now, granted, on the defensive line too, that we're gonna assume that Cam Thomas is now becoming a defensive end. Victor Dimukeje is going to be a defensive end. But like between the edge and the defensive interior, major need. Cornerback, major need. The linebacker, you still feel pretty good. Safety, you feel pretty good. But based on who's out there, like, what are they going to do at those positions? On the defensive line, I have a little bit of a feeling that perhaps Fletcher Cox could be on the horizon. Maybe. Depends on the relationship he's got with JG. But he'd be the type of player that you'd bring in. You can pay him decent money. He's still going to produce, but not at the same level. But you can get him, and it wouldn't even cost J.J. Watt money because J.J. Watt was paid significantly still.
Yeah, and you've got some interesting ones. I mean, you look at the names that are available still, and that just came available. I mean, a guy like Frank Clark just became available. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just throwing names out there. Larry Ogunjobi, is available. Matt Ioannidis is available. Morgan Fox, who's been a good rotational guy inside's available. Ashawn Robinson. So you've got some guys that you could grab that could fill out this defense if needed. Like you said, they're not going to be game changers. You're not going to get guys that are like you're not going to get freaks or things like that, but you can get some guys that can be rotational guys and help this defense probably improve, right? But yeah, there's not a guy out there that you're like, oh wow, this is the guy. On the defensive back side of things, they've got some interesting ones. I'm not sure how up to date these things are. So if somebody's re-signed, I apologize ahead of time.
William Jackson came available. Shaq Griffin's out there.
Yeah, Shaq Griffin's an interesting one. Marcus Peters is interesting. He's older, but you could probably get him on like a 2-year, 1 or 2 year deal for like 10 million total. That would be, and he'd be a veteran, like you said. Shaq Griffin, same type of deal. You could probably get him for like 2 years, 7 to 9 million. Anthony Brown's available, who's not terrible.
I love how we're describing these players as not terrible. And
right.
You look at it, Troy Hill had a couple stints with the Rams. Interesting name as well because we're familiar with him. If we go down the line a little bit, if we're thinking now, granted, Dave Sears dealt more with the college side, but he would have been very familiar with the players on the roster. Mike Hughes was in Detroit last season. But yeah, there's not. I mean, there's still Antonio Hamilton out there, but there's not much out there. You're like, yeah, like does it feel like defensively right now that even though that's Gannon's thing, that they're going to be piecemealing a defense this year?
Yeah, but have they the last 2 years as well? Like that's been kind of one thing that people have said in defense of Lance Joseph is like, look what he's had to work with or who he's had to work with, and it's, I mean, you can't say that's not true. I mean, people got upset with the way they deployed Collins, Isaiah Simmons, but at the same time, you've got a guy. You've had guys that were hurt and banged up and injured that weren't, that just never really came to fruition. And I think that's been the biggest thing for this team, is that the guys you relied on captured, and then you never really had the money to have guys in backup because you kept chasing other positions. So that's what I said. When people look at the Murphy and the Wagner, the Allen contracts, you have to look at it as a reset. Like it really is. Like they're resetting this team to be able to piece together what they feel is the best, fits. And whether or not we agree with it is, it doesn't matter. The reality is this is a team that has a lot of dead money still for guys that aren't even on the roster, and that needs to find a way to fix this. And they got Kaiser White to start with, and they've got, like you said, Fletcher Cox, Robert Quinn are two guys that were with the Eagles and JG last year. How interested are they in coming over, and being a part of this, and would they be interested in that? And then you go to the other side of things. You look at the guys from Tennessee, right? Like, what guys from Tennessee? Has David Long been signed? He's a linebacker, though.
Yes.
Never mind. I was thinking he was the tight or the defensive end. And so there are just guys that you've got to look at and understand that, yeah, this is probably going to be a lean year in terms of like high-end talent, but they've got some choices and they've got some decisions to make, and they're trying to make those as best as possible to put them in a more successful place long term.
Defensively, it feels like they've got to redo things. Obviously, the entire defensive line, cornerback, but on the offensive side of the ball, the position, the center position, still is a mystery, right? And we thought that they were going to prioritize that position, and all the centers that you would think would be in play have come off the board. Garrett Bradbury, re-signed. Ethan Posick, re-signed. Bradley Bose, re-signed. Jake Brendel for the 49ers, re-signed. Jason Kelsey, 1 year, re-signed. What are they going to do at center? Because Rodney Hudson's not going to be it. I mean, Ben Jones is still out there, guy from the Titans, obviously ties with Monty Ossenfort.
I still think that's where they're going to go.
Maybe that makes sense. Ryan Kelly is super intriguing to me because, I still remember about how good he was coming out of college. I remember us talking to him as a prospect on our draft shows and how good he's been. And it's a really similar situation to Rodney Hudson. And kind of thrown out there, and Mike Jurecki did it, but, Jurecki is not number one on most fans' lists right now. However, the possibility, the Colts, who sit there at number 4, they need a quarterback. They just released Matt Ryan. They need to get up to number 3 or get leapfrogged. Wouldn't it be really easy to include Kelly in a deal to the Cardinals that's part of that trade? And it might make sense. Maybe they need to give Kelly a little bit of money up front as a bonus to lower the financial impact on the Cardinals. But I feel like that might not be a bad way to go. Also, there's a Jonathan Gannon connection there. Gannon was over there coaching defensive backs, but he was there on the Colts with Frank Reich, so there's a connection there. So Ryan Kelly, Ben Jones. But after those two, would they go Billy Price?
Maybe they can see if the Eagles want to trade Cam Jurgens.
Ooh, okay. Yeah. Honestly, they wanted him last year.
Right.
But why would they do that? Why would they trade him when Kelsey's only play 1 year?
Maybe you can give up pick 96 for him or something. So you can
Connor McGovern, the center version, Connor McGovern, not the guard Connor McGovern.
Yeah, the guard signed with Buffalo. The center is still available from the New York.
He's a guy that I kind of like in terms of he's not fantastic, but he's solid and he's been super durable, which is super important, and he isn't quite 30, so he's a little bit younger than Ryan Kelly. The other names out there are far from impressive because Justin Britt, John Feliciano. If we want to go with another former Giants offensive lineman, Pat Elflein, but Elflein wasn't even a starter in Carolina. Yeah, a bunch of
the names aren't great. So that's what I was asking. Are you going to rely on a rookie?
I mean, or crazy thought, maybe they all really like Lucita Smith. I think that would be a hard sell. But Lucitas got work at center. I know the Cardinals felt last year that was the future that was the most promising future was him at center. But I can't believe maybe Billy Price is the guy that they're gonna lean on. I don't know. That position boggles my mind because you felt like at least at guard there were lots of options and you actually have options within the building. But when Rodney Hudson isn't it, what are they doing? That's the thing. What are you doing? That is the main thing for me. Like, center makes no sense to me. Everything else is just kind of whatever. Running back, you're going to need some bodies, and I'm not too concerned about that because it's all. But like James Conner's the guy. Like, that's just, it has to be because of the cap hit. Tight end, you've got Trey McBride. Even if Zach Ertz isn't ready at the beginning of the year, you just need a guy. Receiver, you're going to need a receiver if you trade DeAndre Hopkins, but that hasn't happened yet. And you need a quarterback, but again, it's a guy who's going to fill in. So it doesn't feel like center really is the only position where you're like critical. And left guard now feels like, okay, you have options because you do have guys in the building if you want to lean on the young guys. So you've got Josh Jones, baby. You've got Lacita Smith. You've got Mo Hayes coming off injured reserve that they loved last year. So you at least have young guys. Now, depending on the evaluation that they have, and they still got some guys. You got Quentin Harris in the building still. You've got some of the scouts in the development. So if they still believe in the development, so you still have options that you could go with at left guard.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing right now is you're just kind of figuring out what's left and what's left to do, and it's like there's still a ton left to do, and you're like, oh, I see why their signings right now, like they're going to be the third and fourth wave of free agency. Like, this is still the beginning of the second wave, and I feel like their moves are going to be the third and fourth wave, where you're talking about guys like McGovern, we're talking about guys like Anthony Brown and maybe like a Fletcher Cox, who, yes, I know it's a big name, but he's 34 years old.
Right.
Like, he's
a typical Arizona signing, who, like, especially this, who doesn't love to come to Arizona? Like, we Arizona fans, I think we take for granted just how great a place we have to live. Yes, it gets hot as hell, but during the summer, but this place, the social life, the weather, we live in a wonderful place. I love it here. And NFL players think it's great. Coaches, players, they think, especially this time of year, free agents, they come out here. They see all the golf courses. They see the weather. Arizona's and that's why older players come here. It's the same reason why old people come here to retire. The same applies in the NFL. It's a great place to live.
Yep.
Obviously, they still need a punter. They still need a long snapper, but it kind of feels like they're going to be bringing back their guys again.
Yeah, it seems like it's going to happen.
And with that, let's wrap up this edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Best of our Cardinals Talk about this episode 408. Later in the week, we will have another show, whether it's me alone or me and Seth, because there are more moves to come. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Rule. We'll be back again soon. Thanks for listening, as always. Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise Up Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up Sea Red.